Welcome, I'm Mike F. Robbins, and today I thought I would create a companion video about a blog article that I'm writing on moving complex parameter validation to private functions. You can find my blog at mikefrobbins.com, and you can find me on Twitter at mikefrobbins. We'll create a demo folder, change into that folder. You'll notice my VS Code environment is configured very similar to the PowerShell ISE. If that's something you're interested in, you can also find a blog article on my website that discusses that topic. I'll open up an existing function to kind of give you an idea of the thought process. So during my session at the PowerShell Summit last week, or one of my sessions, I got some questions about running private functions from validate script. And it's not really something I'd ever thought about, but it's no different than running test path from within validate script, running some of the native commands, or also running get verb from validate script. You wouldn't rewrite all the code for those commands within validate script. So when we're starting to put a lot of our custom complex code within validate script, we might want to consider breaking that out to private functions. I'll create a non-monolithic script module with my plaster template. If plaster is something you're interested in, once again, I've got blog articles on that. I share my plaster template. It's available on GitHub. Also, if you're interested in what I'm talking about with non-monolithic script module design, I presented a video for a user group a few months ago. That's on my blog as well. Let's create a function called test validate script. This is the same one I used in my presentation last week at the PowerShell Summit. We'll open up that function. You'll notice all it does is validate whether the input is a valid file name, and it returns the file name if it is, and it returns a terminating error with a meaningful error message if it is not a valid file name. And in the context of what this was showed in, I was showing how to write a better validate pattern, because when you use validate pattern with a regular expression and the input is not valid, all it does is return the regular expression and tell the user that, hey, you didn't match this regular expression, which is useless. But when we're writing complex code very similar to this regular expression, we might want to consider breaking this out into a private function. It also makes the code reusable, and it just reduces the complexity altogether within your functions. And if we ever want to update the regular expression, there's only one function instead of potentially hundreds if we've used this all over the place. We'll update our module manifest and add this function we've created to the functions to export section of the manifest. Import our module. We'll test our function with valid input. We'll test it with invalid input. It looks great. There's really nothing wrong with doing it this way, but there could be a better way. So let's break the complexity out into a private function. Let's open up this private function. So we're testing to see if file name is valid. If it's valid, we return true. If it's not, we return false. Very simplistic, but your validation could be a lot more complicated than this, depending on what you're validating. I'll try to call the function just to prove to you that it's not loaded in the current scope. The private function is not loaded in the current scope. Let's create another new function called new Mr. File. This one's very similar to the first one that I showed. The only difference is instead of having the complicated regular expression, we're calling the private function. We'll update our module manifest again. We'll only add the two public functions to the functions to export because we do not want to export the private function. We'll re-import our module. We'll test it with valid input. We'll test it with invalid input. Notice it's the same error message we received before. So the results are the same. We've just moved the complexity of the validation from within our function to a private function, which, as I previously said, allows it to be reused by additional functions. And just to prove to you that only these two functions are exported by this module, I'll run git command. You can see those are the only two functions that are exported. The private function's not exported. Thank you for watching this video. You can find more great content about PowerShell on my blog site at micahrobbins.com.